Have you ever wondered, what happens to the ones who survive? Not the heroes, not the warriors, but the quiet ones. The ones who were left behind, and yet walked out of the smoke. There was a time, not so long ago, when after raids swept through the plains, whether led by settlers or the tribes, few were left standing, especially not children. But sometimes, every rule breaks. A boy is found, not crying, not speaking, just breathing, with dust on his skin and silence in his eyes. And then what? What becomes of a child like that? Raised not by the ones he was born to, but by the very people he once feared? What language does he speak when no one is listening? What side does he choose when the past comes knocking? And when he disappears, does anyone really know why? The air was thick with smoke and silence. The prairie that once rippled with grass now lay flattened beneath chaos and hoofprints. Scattered rifles, shattered wagons, and motionless forms dotted the scorched ground near the Texas border. Overhead, vultures circled, waiting. From the quiet ruins of the clash, a faint sound broke through. A cough. A boy, no older than 15, crawled out from beneath a broken wagon wheel, his face smeared with dust and streaks of red. His clothes, once the stitched fabric of settlers, were torn and stained. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just breathed. The Kiowa warriors had returned to gather what was left, their arrows, their honor. They moved in silence, glancing over the fallen, collecting only what belonged to them. One of the warriors spotted the boy and raised his spear, but hesitated. The boy didn't beg. He sat up slowly, looking the man straight in the eye, his jaw clenched, his stare steady. Far too steady for someone who had just lost everything. Later that day, the Kiowa gathered around him. Elders spoke in low voices. Some said to leave him behind. Others warned that he had seen too much. But one chieftain, a weathered man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and said, "He has the eyes of someone who understands both pain and silence. Let him walk with us." And so, the boy was spared. His hands were tied, but he walked without resistance. They brought him to their camp deep in the valley, a place of canvas lodges and rising smoke, where children played and old women cooked. That night, he sat alone near the edge of the firelight, watching the flames flicker. No one offered him food. No one spoke to him. He didn't ask for either. The next morning, boys from the village approached to test him. They poked him, teased him in a language he didn't yet understand. Still, he didn't react. One of them grabbed a stick and struck his arm. The boy looked back at him, calm, unmoving. From a distance, an older warrior watched in silence. He nodded once. By nightfall, the chieftains held council. The boy remained standing just outside the circle, arms bound, his face unreadable. They spoke in hushed tones. "He is no longer one of them," said one. "He is not yet one of us," replied another. Finally, the scarred chieftain stood again. "Then let him be the son of no one." The boy with no name. The others nodded. That night, he lay near the fire. A woman placed a blanket beside him, though he didn't touch it. He lay on his back, eyes open, staring up at a sky that held no stars. What had been taken from him would never return, his voice, his name, his past. But something else had been given? A second beginning. And no one yet knew what kind of silence lived inside him. Weeks passed. The boy, is still nameless, remained. The Kiowa didn't push him away, but they didn't fully welcome him either. He lived on the edge of everything, the edge of the fire circle, the edge of the camp, the edge of every conversation. But he watched. And listened. And learned. He began to repeat their words, quietly at first. When he brought water to the elder women, he nodded and spoke a single syllable. When a dog barked, he softly echoed its name. When a man dropped a spear, the boy picked it up and said, "Take." Every word earned him a glance, not quite friendly, but not cold. It meant someone had noticed. He watched the young warriors train. Bows curved like wings. Horses moved like lightning across the plains. He studied without asking. One morning, a warrior named Shawnee tossed him a small, worn bow. No instructions. Just a nod. The boy took it, unsteady, unsure, but returned every day. Within a month, his aim was true. They gave him tasks. He carried wood, brought water, helped clean hides. He followed every order without question. The girls laughed at how serious he was. Some boys tried to provoke him, but their teasing rolled off him like rain on stone. One evening, after a hunt, the boys gathered around the fire, sharing food and stories. The nameless boy stayed quiet, listening with calm, steady eyes. Then a younger boy leaned toward him and asked, half joking, "You never make a sound at night." "Why?" The group fell silent. The boy stared into the fire and answered softly, "Because I remember." From that moment, he had a name. Tsahan, they called him, the one who doesn't cry out. The name stuck. Children said it with curiosity. Elders, with quiet respect. Even the dogs seemed to know it. Tsahan became part of the rhythm of the camp, not quite family, but no longer a stranger. He rode ponies bareback through dusty hills. He practiced throwing spears at shadows. He helped fix broken arrows and traced stars with his eyes, as if they were maps to somewhere he used to know. Still, he never spoke of his past. Never mentioned the woman who once held his hand. Never named the place he once lived. It was as if those words had vanished with the smoke. One day, a girl named Suna gave him a small leather cord with a bead carved from bone. "It's for luck," she said. He nodded and tied it around his wrist. He wore it every day after that. That night, he dreamed again. The wagon. The flames. The noise. But even in sleep, he made no sound. When the sun rose, Tsahan stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon. He was still just a boy. But the silence inside him had grown stronger. And the Cowboy, without ever saying it, had started to trust him. By the time the spring rains ended, the boy's hair had grown long and dark, tied back like the other youths. His skin was no longer pale, the sun had turned it the color of the earth. He laughed sometimes. He joked. He rode his horse with ease and whispered to it like it was his only true friend. The warriors began to take notice. One morning, just before dawn, the elders gathered in a circle. The boy, now known as Tsahan, stood in the center, his chest bare, a red line painted across his brow. The fire crackled between them. No one spoke for a long time. Then the scarred chieftain stepped forward. "You have endured what many do not," he said. "You've carried silence like others carry blades. Today, we offer you another name." He dipped a hand into ash and smeared it across the boy's chest. "You will be called Mukotai, Quiet Horse. You are still young, but your spirit moves like the wind." The tribe let out a single, deep cry, not of sorrow, not of fear, but of welcome. That day, Mukotai received his own bow, not borrowed, not shared. A real one, carved from cedar, with feathers tied near the grip. He was also given a horse, lean, fast, with black and white patches and fierce eyes that mirrored his own. He rode with the others that afternoon, galloping across the wide, sunlit plains, shouting into the wind. For the first time, he felt weightless, not only in his body, but in his soul. Later, during training, his arrows struck every mark. His arms were steady. His aim never wandered. Some of the others began to fall behind. One of them, a proud youth named Takani, watched him with a quiet tension that didn't go away. That night, Takani challenged him to a race. They thundered through the valley, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Mukhotai won, just barely, but didn't lift his arms in victory. He simply dismounted and gave a single nod. Takone looked away, heat rising in his cheeks. The next morning, the warriors were preparing to scout distant lands. A whisper passed through the camp: Mukhotai had been chosen to ride with them. He packed no words. Only silence. They rode east, across dry riverbeds and thorny trails, past the sun-bleached remains of old bones and forgotten stones. For hours they moved like shadows, until they reached a high ridge. Below them, in the valley, a line of white tents shimmered under the fading light, a caravan of settlers. Mukhotai watched from above. His chest tightened, memory stirring beneath the surface. Still, he said nothing. Only stared. "Do you know their ways?" one of the warriors asked. Mukhotai paused, then shook his head. They remained until moonrise, then turned their horses back toward home. That night, as they made camp beneath the stars, Mukhotai stayed awake. His hand rested near his blade, and his eyes scanned the dark. He didn't close them once. In his dream, the wagons returned. But this time, he wasn't running away. He was riding toward them. The summer sun burned high, casting long shadows across the dry earth. The Kiowa camp moved closer to a small trading post near the frontier. They needed supplies, salt, flour, tools, and the warriors sought news from beyond the hills. Mukhotai rode with them. They approached the wooden buildings carefully, their presence drawing watchful glances from townspeople. Mukhotai kept his head down, his face shaded by long hair and shadow. But as they passed the general store, he heard something that stopped him still. A voice. "Hey, son. You dropped this." It was a man's voice, gentle, tired, and unmistakably familiar. A young settler boy had dropped a coin, and the man had picked it up. Mukhotai turned slightly. His eyes met the man's for just a second. "You all right?" the man asked. And without thinking, Mukhotai replied, "Yes, sir. I'm fine." The man froze for a moment. His accent was perfect. Smooth. Clear. Not a trace of hesitation. Not the voice of someone raised in the campfires and rhythms of Kiowa life. It was the voice of someone who had once belonged to a different world, one of books and benches, not bows and ponies. "You're not from around here, are you?" or the man asked. But Mukhotai had already turned and walked away. That night, he didn't sleep. His own voice, in English, played over and over in his mind. Soft, familiar, untouched by time. It had returned without warning, like a tide that never truly went out. In the days that followed, he withdrew again. But this time, the quiet felt different. It wasn't peace. It was weight. He rode alone. He avoided the others. He stared at the distant ridgelines with searching eyes. One afternoon, by a shallow creek, a younger boy came up behind him and noticed something strange. Mukhotai held a small leather pouch. Inside it was a folded, weathered piece of paper, covered in faded English writing. A verse. A name, handwritten in the corner. The boy said nothing. He simply watched, then quietly walked away. That evening, the old shaman approached. "You walk like a son of Kiowa," he said, "but your shadow reaches beyond our fires." Mukhotai didn't respond. The shaman lit his pipe. Languages grow like roots. If you speak too many in the wrong soil, you may forget which one you grew from. That night, Mukhotai dreamed of a woman's voice. She was singing, soft, low, full of warmth. But he couldn't remember the song. In the dream, when he opened his mouth to answer, two voices came out. One in Kiowa. One in English. They twisted together like vines. He awoke covered in sweat, his heart beat sharp and fast. The next morning, one of the older warriors, the same who once taught him to ride, looked at him over a quiet meal and asked, If there's a line between them and us, where will you stand? Mukhotai didn't answer. He stood and walked away. At sunset, he climbed the ridge above the camp. Below, the evening fires flickered like stars. Far beyond them, the distant lights of the town shimmered on the horizon. He stood there for a long time, unmoving. And when no one was near, he whispered, in English, "I don't know anymore." The days grew hotter. The grass cracked beneath every step. Even the horses moved slower, cautious in the heavy, watchful silence. Something was shifting. The air didn't smell of fire, it smelled like the pause before one. Mukhotai spent more time alone. He often rode past the hills with no explanation. He'd sit near the dry creek bed, eyes locked on the dust, hands wrapped around the same old piece of folded paper. The words written there, in English, had begun to feel heavy. He read them again and again, until they meant nothing, or perhaps far too much. One morning, he returned from a long ride, his clothes streaked with sweat and dust. As he tied his horse, Takani, the boy who had once raced him, stepped from the shadows. "You go far," Takani said. "Too far." Mukhotai didn't answer. Takani stepped closer. "You're keeping something from us." Still no answer. "I've seen how you watch the townsfolk. You don't see them as strangers. You look at them like you remember." Mukhotai stayed quiet. Takani shoved him. And then came the strike, sudden, rough, real. They clashed in the dirt like cornered animals. Takani wiped his face, his lip cut. Mukhotai's knuckles were scraped. No one stopped them. When it was over, Mukhotai stood above him, breathing hard, his face unreadable. But his eyes held no victory, only regret. That night, he didn't return to the fire. He walked beyond the edge of camp, alone beneath the stars, the ground cool beneath his feet. Near the river, he unwrapped the pouch again, the paper, the name, the message from another world. And for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. In the dark, the old shaman appeared like smoke in the wind. "You dream in two languages," he said. "And now they pull you in opposite directions." Mukhotai looked at him. "What do I do when both feel true?" The shaman exhaled through the pipe. "You carry them both. Or let one go." Mukhotai nodded slowly. Then turned and left without a sound. At dawn, he packed a small bag. No one noticed him ride out. He crossed the hills alone, the wind tugging at his shirt like a warning. The town looked smaller than he remembered, quieter, slower. He moved unseen through its alleys and fences, until he reached a guarded outpost on the edge of the settlement. A man in uniform stepped forward. "You lost, son." Mukhotai met his gaze. "I have something to tell you," he said. His English was clear. Measured. Sharp as stone. Inside, in a plain canvas tent, a higher officer listened as the boy described the layout of the Cowboy camp, where supplies were stored, where the horses rested, the narrow path that twisted behind the ridge. Mukhotai spoke plainly. No emotion. No hesitation. When the officer asked for his name, he paused. Then he lied, "Daniel. Daniel Price." The man nodded. "You did the right thing." Mukhotai didn't reply. As he stepped out of the tent, he stopped. From the rise behind him, he could still see the smoke of the Cowboy fires. He stood there a while, unmoving. Then he turned and walked into the world he used to know. By the second night, Mukhotai still had not returned. His horse stood tied near the corral, untouched. His bow and arrows were gone. His sleeping mat lay just as he'd left it. The others noticed, but said little. Some believed he'd gone on a long hunt. Others stayed silent, exchanging quiet, uneasy glances. Takani was the first to speak aloud what many had already thought. "He's not coming back." The old shaman sat near the fire, unmoving. That evening, two young warriors set out to find him. They followed his trail west, then lost it near the rocks. No signs of struggle. No broken branches. No farewell. In the early hours of the next morning, as mist still clung to the ground, a strange stillness settled over the valley. Even the dogs were quiet. Then came the sound. A distant crack. Then another. The camp jolted awake. The strike came from the east, not across the wide plain, but through the narrow ridge, the place no one ever watched. Arrows flew. Shouts echoed. Smoke climbed fast into the morning sky. Riders burst through the trees, flashes of light from their hands. The Cowboy rushed to protect their own, but the hit landed hard, at the horse pen, the very heart of their freedom. Mothers called out for children. Warriors charged forward with bare hands and raw voices. Elders gripped spears with shaking fingers. The ground shook with the pounding of hooves and confusion. From a high ridge, a figure on horseback observed in silence. His people moved like clockwork, striking at the weakest points. The plan had worked. At the center of camp, the old shaman stood between the children and the chaos, arms wide, chanting. Something struck him in the chest. He staggered, whispered a word no one heard, and fell. By midday, the riders withdrew, not because they were defeated, but because their mission was complete. The valley was quiet once more, though not in peace. The horse herd had scattered. Smoke hung over the camp like a heavy blanket. Tents were torn. The air carried the weight of loss. In the silence that followed, those who remained moved slowly. They lifted the hurt. They searched the ruins. They buried the noise in their throats. And nowhere, not in the ashes, not beyond the trees, not in any direction, was Mukotai. One of the younger warriors climbed the ridge that evening. He walked among discarded canteens and scattered footprints. But he found nothing. No sound. No sign. Only absence. That night, around the low fire, no one said his name. But everyone thought of his eyes, calm, distant. And how he had always stood just outside the circle. The valley was quiet now. The smoke had thinned, but the smell of ash lingered in the wind. Nothing moved quickly. Even the birds had stopped singing. Women tended the wounded in silence. Children sat close together, not playing, not speaking. The fires burned low. It felt as if the land itself was in mourning. They buried the shaman under a blackened tree, the roots still hot from fire. The children placed stones in a circle around his grave. A young girl left a braid of sweetgrass. No words were spoken. Words had done too much already. At the evening fire, the elders gathered. Takani stood among them, fists clenched. He knew, he said. He told them. No one argued. The others listened as he recounted the signs, the long rides, the English whispers, the absence. He told them of the torn paper he once saw, the strange words he couldn't read. The silence that had once made the boy special now marked him as guilty. One of the older women pulled something from her bundle. A scrap of parchment, dirt-stained and wrinkled. She had found it half-buried near the horse pen. A name was written on it. Daniel Price. No one knew the name. But the script was in the white man's language, and the map drawn beside it showed the valley, the corral, the blind ridge. There was no doubt anymore. He did not scream, Takani said. Not even when he broke us. The elders said nothing. Finally, the scarred chieftain stood. He held the paper over the fire and let it burn. The flames caught quickly, curling the corners like dry leaves. He no longer has a name among us, the chief said. Let the wind carry it away. The girl named Suna walked quietly to the riverbank. On her wrist, she still wore the small bone charm she had once given him. She untied it, looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into the current. The river didn't pause. It carried it off without resistance. The next morning, someone noticed his horse. It stood alone on the edge of camp, untied, unfed, but it hadn't run. It simply waited, staring into the hills. The children approached it carefully. It didn't move. One little boy touched its mane. "Do you think he meant to hurt us?" he asked. An old warrior squatted beside him, gazing into the distance. "Sometimes," he said, "even silence is a choice." That night, no one told stories. No one sang. They simply sat, listening to the wind that moved through the broken valley, and wondering if it still carried the sound of his footsteps, or if he had vanished for good.